Hello students and welcome to chapter number 17. This chapter is titled Motivation. We know by now that managers are in charge of a lot of things, and one of them is of course motivating their workforce, motivating the people whom they supervise. So this chapter will show us a lot of theories, psychological theories involving motivation, and how can managers use these theories in order to motivate and push their employees to do a better job. Okay, so let us begin with a definition of motivation. As you can see, the definition of motivation entails or involves three elements or three factors or three components. So the first one is energy. So energy is all about how big that effort is. It's all about, how intense this effort that you are exerting, that you are putting forth. So when you are motivated to get a better grade on an exam, for example, you are doing more. You have this larger energy. You have this effort that you are, exerting more. However, just because you are putting in and putting forth a lot of effort, it doesn't mean that this is necessarily going to result in better performance. And this is why we need the second element, and that is direction. So all this big effort needs to be channeled, through a correct direction. If someone, for example, is driving a car, so when you are pressing the gas pedal so hard, the car is going to drive very fast. But does that mean that you are going to reach your destination faster than others if you are not, directing and steering your car in the correct direction? Of course not. So this is why direction is extremely important as well. This big effort that you are exerting, this big energy, this intensity needs to be channeled through direction. And finally, the third and last element over here is sustainability, meaning this shouldn't be a one-time thing. In order for motivation to work well for organizations and for you even on on your personal life, this doesn't uh, this doesn't work if it is a one-time thing. It needs to be persistent. You need to do this on a regular basis, and this is something that you need to keep up. So three elements: energy, this means intensity, big efforts. These big efforts must be channeled, must be directed, and then sustainability or persistence, meaning that this big intense effort must not be a one-time kind of shot, but this is something that you must keep up. Now with the first theory in our chapter, which is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So Maslow ordered human needs in a hierarchy or in a pyramid, meaning that levels of needs exist, and you cannot move up those levels unless you satisfy the needs at the previous levels. Once we get to see a sort of a visualization of it, I hope this will make it a bit clearer. So Maslow ordered needs in terms of their not priority, but in terms of how basic they are. So we begin at the very lower level with physiological needs, and then we move up this pyramid, we move up this hierarchy up to higher level needs like self-actualization. So here's an illustration of how Maslow's hierarchy of needs theory work. We start at the very bottom. So these are the most basic human needs, physiological needs. Once we satisfy once we provide all what you need in this level, then you as a human being can move up to the next level, safety. And once we satisfy your safety needs, now we can move to the social needs and so on. So in the next couple of slides, we will be discussing what each level entails. Okay, so the main point of Maslow's hierarchy of needs is that we start at the very bottom. We start with very low level needs, basic human being needs, physiological needs. Once we satisfy them, once we provide them, once you are secured in terms of those levels of needs, only now you can move up the pyramid. So just like we saw in this illustration, so we start with the most basic human needs. Okay, those are physiological needs, your needs for food, drink, shelter, and any other physical needs. So anything that has to do with, sustaining life. You need food and drink and shelter in order for you to be alive. So we cannot even start talking about you, giving your full energy and efforts and realizing your full potential before we satisfy these needs. So this is the main point of Maslow, is that if you want your employees, so this is the implication for managers and for organizations, how can you ask your employees to become creative and to give you lots of ideas and bring in lots of initiatives when you haven't satisfied and provided the things that they need in order for them to feel secured and safe and part of a bigger group and so on. So physiological needs are anything that has to do with sustaining life. You need food, you need drink, you need shelter, and so on. Okay, so one could ask, what does that have to do with a manager? What does that have to do with organizations? Well, now you know that these things are basic needs and these things must be satisfied. So you must pay, for example, your employees enough money so that they can provide these things for themselves and for their families. It goes even beyond this. In the Ministry of Human Resources nowadays, they have certain conditions for every company. You must have a restaurant, for example. من شروط وزارة الموارد البشرية عندنا في القطاع الخاص إنه لابد يكون في مكان للاستراحة، لابد يكون في مكان للصلاة، لابد يكون في مكان للأكل. فهذه شغلات بيسك، احتياجات أساسية للإنسان، فلا بد أنه هي المنظمة والشركة والمانجر يعمل على توفيرها قبل ما يطالب موظفينه بالإبداع وبمبادرات وببرامج إلى آخره. هذه هي الفكرة الرئيسية في نظرية مازلو. And now that we have satisfied physiological needs, we can move up the pyramid to the next level of needs, and that is safety needs. And those are your needs for security and protection from physical and emotional harm. So, okay, now I have food, I have water, now I need to feel that I am safe. Safety needs. I need to feel that no one is going to attack me, that I will be protected against physical and emotional harm. Okay? So how does that work for organizations, for managers? There must be, policies in place against, harassment, against bullying, for example. So, and also there are, even more obvious things like, not allowing and permitting strangers to enter into the premises of the workplace without showing proper identification and so on. So you feel that no lunatic is just going to drive into my company and start shooting people because there are safety procedures in place. And it goes on and on. So the implications for organizations or managers are plenty. It's all about making sure that you are providing whatever it takes to make your employees feel that they are safe and secured. Now, the next level of needs is social needs. So social needs, we are human beings. We need others to, feel that we are part of a bigger group. We need friends, we need family, we need that, that feeling that we belong to, to certain groups of people. We need affection, we need love. في مثل باللغة العربية يقولون الجنة من غير ناس ما تنداس. فيما معنى ذلك أنه حتى الجنة طالما ما فيها تواصل اجتماعي ما تكون مرغوبة عند الناس. فمجرد هو مثل لا علاقة له بالدين، ولكن هذا جزء من يعني طبيعة البشر وتكوينهم، يحتاجون للتواصل مع الآخرين. لاحظوا كيف في فترة الحجر المنزلي وفترة تعليق العمل في ظل جائحة كورونا كيف الناس بدأت تتوتر وتفتقد أصحابها وتفتقد أسرها. So this is what we are talking about, social needs. We as human beings, we need others. We need others. We need that connection. We need that feeling that, we belong to a bigger group, that we have people that we share interests with, that we have friends, that we have family, that we communicate with. Continuing to move up those levels of needs, now we have reached esteem needs. And notice that they come right after social needs. So right after you are part of a bigger group, right after the fact that we are human beings and that we need others to feel love and affection and sense of belonging. So now we move up to what is called esteem needs. So that is your personal need for self-respect, for things like recognition and so on. So these things cannot happen without others. So this level kinds of distinguishes between internal factors and external factors when it comes to esteem needs. So that esteem, that respect that you have for yourself, it can stem from within. So internal factors, how much respect you have for yourself, how to what degree do you feel on the inside that you are a person who achieves a lot of things, good things. And then there's the respect and recognition that comes from others. When you get that validation from others, when others say about you that you are a great person, that you are a productive person, that you are someone who achieves a lot. So both internal and external factors are involved when it comes to esteem needs, when it comes to feeling of fulfillment and so on. And finally, the last level, the highest level, is called self-actualization. So this is when you realize your full potential. This is a person's need to become what they are capable of becoming. So when you utilize all your capabilities, skills, and knowledge, and all those special things that you have in order to do better on your personal life, on your career, for your country, for your organization, and so on. So we cannot even start to demand our employees to be at that level without having satisfied all of those other previous most basic needs. So this is the main point of Maslow. And here is the second theory in our chapter, and that is McGregor's theory. So you have probably heard of theory X and theory Y managers. So this is basically a perception. This is just a theory. This is just something that some managers have in their heads. So we have some managers who typically assume that all employees, they dislike work, they are lazy, they avoid responsibility. So it's a negative view of employees. So if you are working under this assumption, if you believe, if you think that employees are generally lazy and they generally do not like work, so what you are going to do in order to motivate them, you are going to closely control them. You are going to force them to do a better job. You are going to, do a lot of things that ensure that they are doing their job right and they are not slacking off. This is what happens when you are managers operating under this negative view. Now, we're not saying that, either of them is better than the other. We are just, going through all of the possible theories available out there and how each and every one of them works. And now the more positive view, that is theory Y. In this perception, in this belief, managers assume that employees are generally creative, they typically enjoy work, and they actually, seek responsibility. So if you are a manager operating under this positive view, how to motivate this group of people, you are going to involve them in decision making. You are going to give them more challenging assignments, and you are going to do a lot of other things in order to keep that level of motivation, challenge, and enjoyability. So these are the implications that I have mentioned at the beginning. So for each and every theory, you must understand what it is. So what's the idea behind that theory, and how can managers apply it? So theory X, it's a negative view. When you think that, all people are like that, or at least the majority of people are lazy, they don't like work, how can you motivate them? You need to زي ما نقول بالعربي توقف فوق راسهم، تتاكد ما وقفوا على راسهم بالعصا، تتاكد انه كل واحد قاعد يسوي شغله، تتاكد انه ما حد جالس بيخالف الانظمه والى اخره. But in theory Y, you are typically assuming that everyone is actually good, that employees, are generally good people. They are they enjoy work, they like responsibility and challenging assignments. So how can you motivate this group of people under this assumption? راح تعطيهم ثقة أكبر، راح تعطيهم تحديات أكبر، راح تعطيهم صلاحية لاتخاذ القرارات and so on. The third theory in our chapter for today is Herzberg's two-factor theory. So yet another theory of motivation. So Herzberg suggested that we have two different factors that are responsible for job satisfaction and motivation. And he is suggesting that we have intrinsic and extrinsic factors, so just like internal and external factors. So in his suggestion, intrinsic factors are the ones that are related to job satisfaction and motivation. The intrinsic factors, the internal factors, are the ones that are responsible for job satisfaction and motivation. But the external factors, the extrinsic factors, are the ones that are associated with dissatisfaction, the opposite of satisfaction. So once we get to discuss this more and see some more examples, hopefully this will be a lot more clear. So here are some examples of what we mean by those intrinsic and extrinsic factors, internal and external. So he is naming them motivators and hygiene factors. So the motivators are the intrinsic, the internal factors that are responsible for improving job satisfaction and improving motivation. So things like achievement, recognition, the work itself, the level of responsibility, for example, advancement and growth. So when you have these things available, when you feel these things, you are going to experience better levels and higher levels of job satisfaction, and you will be much more motivated. So this is his idea. Okay, so when you feel that sense of achievement, لما يكون الوظيفة كذا تعطيك إحساس بالإنجاز وإحساس إنه أنت قاعد تسوي حاجة مهمة، ولما تحس إنه في نوع من النمو في قدراتك، في نوع من إنك قاعد تتعلم شيء جديد وإن أنت قاعد بتتحسن وتتطور. So these are intrinsic things, internal factors, motivating factors. Okay? All of those things, they help you become more motivated and you feel more satisfied about your job. On the other hand, the external or extrinsic factors, which Herzberg named hygiene factors, they are responsible for you feeling dissatisfied. They have nothing to do with motivation. They have nothing to do with motivation, but when they are available, they are going to reduce your feelings of job dissatisfaction. Let's see what they mean. So we have examples like supervision, salary, security, relationship with your subordinates and your superiors, and so on. So this is why they are called external or extrinsic factors. They have nothing to do with you. They are external to you. ما هو إحساس داخلي، هذه شغلات خارجية، شغلات لها علاقة بالراتب، بالمشرف المباشر، علاقتك مع الآخرين, and so on. Okay, so this is why they are called extrinsic factors. So the idea here is that those extrinsic factors اللي سماهم Herzberg hygiene factors, these hygiene factors, if they are available, they are not going to lead to more motivation. ما راح تخليك متحفز أكثر وعندك دافع أكثر. But what they are going to do is that they are going to improve your job satisfaction. So his idea is that satisfaction and dissatisfaction are not just the opposite of one another, they are totally two different things. So this is just a reiteration of the main point. So hygiene factors are the ones that are extrinsic. Okay, so things that have to do with the supervisor, with the salary, and so on. So if they are available, if you have a good salary, for example, if you are being paid a lot of money for doing this job, it doesn't mean that you are going to be more motivated. It just means that your job satisfaction levels are going to be improved. Okay, مجرد انه انت قاعد تاخذ راتب كبير ما هو شرط انه انت راح تكون متحفز اكثر، هو فقط الرضا بالوظيفة هذه يكون عندك افضل. ولكن ايش اللي يخليك فعلا متحفز اكثر انه انت تبذل مجهود اكثر؟ الاشياء الداخلية، the motivators, those internal factors that have to do, with the sense of achievement, with the sense of responsibility, with the feelings that I am growing and I am learning more things and I am improving my knowledge and skills and abilities and so on. Okay, so this is why the Herzberg two-factor theory must be understood very clearly. So we have internal factors, external factors. We call them intrinsic and extrinsic. He calls them, Herzberg calls them hygiene and motivators. When we talk about motivators, we talk about the internal things. So when you have these things, when you have a sense of achievement, sense of responsibility and growth, you are indeed going to feel more satisfied and you are going to be much more motivated. But when it comes to hygiene factors, those external factors like the salary and so on, these things, if they are available, they are not going to lead to more motivation. They are just going to lead to more satisfaction. And this illustration shows exactly that point. So the traditional view before Herzberg was, that satisfaction and dissatisfaction are just the opposites of one another. So you are either satisfied or you are not. But when it comes to Herzberg, he was suggesting that you can be satisfied and motivated, or you can be satisfied but not motivated. So satisfaction and motivation do not necessarily go hand in hand. So just like we saw, مجرد انه انت قاعد تاخذ راتب كبير جدا، انت حتكون راضي عن وظيفتك وراضي عن هذه الوظيفة، ولكن ليس شرطا انه انت تكون متحفز اكثر to do a better job. So hygiene factors, they are in charge of you feeling dissatisfaction or not. They are responsible for eliminating job dissatisfaction. Okay, so the opposite of satisfaction is not no satisfaction, and the opposite of dissatisfaction is not satisfaction. So I know it sounds a little bit complex, but when you understand it this way, I'm hoping it will make things a lot more clear. So you can be satisfied and motivated. At the same time, you can also be satisfied and reporting higher levels of satisfaction about your job and not be motivated. Okay, so that's the theory of Herzberg. The factors that cause satisfaction are different from the factors that cause dissatisfaction. فبالتالي هم ما هم العكس، لأنه الأشياء اللي تسببهم مختلفة عن بعض تماما. الأشياء اللي تسبب الساتسفاكشن أشياء داخلية، والأشياء اللي تسبب الديسساتسفاكشن أشياء خارجية. فطالما المسببات مختلفة عن بعض مش معناها إنه الساتسفاكشن and dissatisfaction هم مجرد عكس بعض، هم شيئين مختلفين لهم ظروفهم ولهم مسبباتهم المختلفة. Our next theory is suggested by David McClelland, and McClelland here has three components of motivation at work. So he is suggesting that there are three major motives at work, and those are the need for achievement, the need for power, and the need for affiliation. So basically people are moved, are driven by different things. Some of them are driven by their need for achievement, and that is their desire to excel, their desire to be excellent at something. So for each and every task at work, those tasks are going to be assessed and evaluated against a certain set of standards. So those people who have a high need for achievement, they are driven and pushed and motivated by wanting to succeed at these tasks, by wanting to do these tasks in a better way, by achieving those objectives of those tasks more efficiently, more creatively, and so on. So that is the need for achievement. Some people who have a high need for achievement are driven, are pushed, are motivated by their desire to do something better, to achieve something. And the next couple of needs in the three needs theory are the need for power and the need for affiliation. So the need for power is the need to make others behave in a way that they would not have behaved otherwise. What does that mean? It's all about control. It's all about influence. It's all about impact. So there are people with high levels of their need for power, meaning that they are driven, they are pushed, they are motivated by wanting to control, but wanting to influence the behaviors of others. So what is the implication of this three needs theory? So when we know that certain people are driven by something like this, then we know how to deal with them. So we know how to motivate them in a better way. So those, for example, who are motivated by their need for achievement, as we have seen in the previous slide, we need to give them more challenging assignments. We need to give them some recognition as well, so that When they do a good job, we recognize those achievements of theirs. People who are motivated by their need for power, they need to be given some sort of control. They need to be given some sort of authority for decision making. And finally, the need for affiliation. This is the desire for friendly and close interpersonal relationships. So people with high levels, when it comes to the need for affiliation, they are motivated and driven and excited by wanting to form close relationships with others, by wanting to become friends with others. So those are the kinds of people who like tasks that involve group projects and team assignments, things like that. Not only just the mere fact of group assignments, it's about forming closer, more friendly relationships with others. So those are, when you know that your employee has a high level when it comes to his or her need for affiliation, then you know that this kind of person is going to be more motivated when it comes to group projects, when it comes to team assignments. So this is how we put these theories to work. McClelland's theory is suggesting that there are three types of needs, and people are motivated by different kinds of needs, whether it's their need for achievement, for power, or for affiliation. The next theory is a very popular one, the goal setting theory. So it says that the more specific your goals are, the more motivated you are going to be when it comes to obtaining them. So specific goals increase performance, and difficult goals, when they are accepted, when they are like challenging enough but not impossible to attain, they will result in a better performance than do easy goals or impossible ones. So this is what this theory is all about. When you, as a manager, when you are setting goals for your employees, you need to give them goals that are attainable, still challenging enough, difficult enough. They do not need to be very easy or very difficult, because otherwise they are going to have a reverse effect. They are going to be demotivating. So the goals that you set for your team, they must be specific, they must be attainable, they must be realistic. So this is what is referred to generally as setting SMART goals. SMART goals. S-M-A-R-T. This is an acronym. This is not the word SMART. So since we are talking about goal setting, we also must mention a core self-evaluation trait, and that is self-efficacy. What is self-efficacy? It's your belief about your own self, about how capable you are when it comes to doing something, when it comes to performing a task, for example. How confident you are in yourself that you will succeed at doing something. So people who have high levels of self-efficacy, when they are presented with a challenging, difficult task, or when they are placed in a difficult situation, they will, thrive. They are going to do much more in order to succeed, because they believe in themselves. They believe that we have what it takes to be successful. On the other side, people with low levels of self-efficacy, they give up easily. They do not have that belief, they do not have that confidence in themselves that they are able to do that. So as a manager, as someone who is in charge of others, you need to be aware of such a personality trait when it comes to your employees. Are they motivated by more challenging assignments, or will they feel that this is more than what they can handle, and then this is going to just backfire? So a goal setting theory. Goal setting theory is one of the most popular ones. It's all about setting smart goals, goals that are specific, that are attainable, that are challenging enough. This theory is saying that this is going to be much more motivating than giving your employees a very easy job. So this is how the goal setting theory works. So we start with the goals themselves. We have certain, conditions for these goals. They must be specific, they must be difficult. Difficult meaning challenging enough. They should not be impossible or very difficult. Otherwise, they're going to have a reverse effect. So now these goals, they must be accepted by the employees. So you must present these goals to your employees, and they must accept them in order for them to be motivating for those employees. So a good idea here, as you can see in the green box, is that you must involve employees in setting those goals. You shouldn't just tell your employees, these are your goals, just work on achieving them. Involve them in the process. لما تشرك الموظفين تشركهم في وضع الأهداف, you are going to get more motivation. You are going to get more commitment. So the goals should be accepted and committed to achieving by those employees of yours. So you can involve them in the process of goal setting. Then we can move to the next part where those goals now are motivating because they are specific, they are challenging enough, they have been accepted, they have been committed to. So now the motivation that arises from these types of goals, this kind of motivation is of course relevant to self-efficacy, as we have described already. So the personalities of different people, of course, play a major role in the achievement of those goals and the motivational levels when it comes to setting goals. And then, of course, feedback is an essential element. You always constantly must give feedback to employees, and employees must seek feedback from managers. And all this process is going to lead to higher levels of performance in addition to the achievement of those goals. So it's a process. Goals have certain conditions that they must meet. People who are going to obtain these goals, they must accept them, they must commit to these goals, and then depending on their personality traits, they are going to be motivated enough by these goals, which will lead them to achieving them after seeking and getting the necessary feedback. Okay, the last theory we will be presenting in this chapter is the reinforcement theory. So this is very different from all the theories that we have described because it focuses only on the consequences of your actions, of your behaviors. So it has nothing to do with your need to do something or internal and external factors. It has to do with the results of your behaviors and actions. So it's all about, you are likely going to repeat actions or behaviors that have positive or favorable consequences. And you are going to avoid certain behaviors because they have negative or undesirable, unfavorable kinds of consequences. So you come to work early. This is a behavior. You coming to work early, this is a behavior. What is the consequence of this behavior, of this action? You get rewarded by your supervisor. So now this reward is a positive thing, is a good, favorable thing that you want to happen again and again. So because the result of your behavior was positive, you are probably going to repeat this behavior again in the future. Let's take a negative example. So you write a report in a certain way. Okay, you write it in a certain way, you present it to your boss doesn't like it, and he yells at you. So now you are getting a negative consequence, a negative consequence of your behavior. So you are likely not going to repeat that behavior again. You are not going to write that report in that way ever again, because the result is negative. The result is unfavorable. Okay, so this is the reinforcement theory in brief. Reinforcers are those consequences which will increase or decrease the probability of you repeating that behavior. Okay, so the recognition that you get from your supervisor, this is a reinforcer. The salary raise that you get because you did something well, this is a reinforcer. Okay, so this is how this reinforcement theory works. It's all about the consequences. It's all about the results, whether or not they are favorable or unfavorable. Now that we have discussed all the theories presented in our chapter, we will dedicate this part now to discuss how can managers and how can organizations design motivating jobs. So how can we make the jobs motivating in terms of their nature, in terms of how they are designed, in terms of how the tasks are put together to form complete jobs. This is what job design is. How can we make the tasks and the duties and the responsibilities, the things that you perform on a daily basis, how can we design all of those put together in a way that is motivating for employees? So the first kind of approach that we can use and manipulate is expanding the job scope. When we talk about job scope, we talk about the number of tasks and the frequency of how those tasks are repeated. So when we talk about job scope, we talk about job enlargement. That's one of the varieties of working on job scope. So if we want to make the job more motivating, we can increase the job scope by enlarging the responsibilities that you have. Meaning, imagine the job of a dentist's assistant, the assistant of a dentist. So this is a person who is typically called a dental hygienist. Their job is basically just to clean the teeth of patients. But in addition to that, we can increase the job scope and enlarge the job, the horizontal expansion of the job, by adding more tasks. So instead of doing only one thing, which is cleaning patients' teeth, they can also update the system. We can ask them to also, pull the files of patients, schedule appointments, and so on. So this way, the job is not routine, is not monotonous, it's not about only doing one thing. It involves a variety of different tasks. So that's how jobs are designed when we play a little with job scope. So job enlargement, it comes from the word itself. We make it larger, we make it bigger. How? By adding more tasks and by increasing the frequency at which those tasks are repeated. So instead of doing it only one time a week, this is something that could be done on a daily basis. This is the frequency that we mean. Okay, so that's one approach. The second approach is the vertical expansion. So in the previous slide, we have seen the horizontal expansion of jobs by adding more tasks. But when we talk about job enrichment, we are talking about job depth. So by enriching, making jobs richer, we are increasing the depth of jobs. How? By giving the employees more freedom, by giving them more responsibility, by giving them more authority to make decisions. It's called freedom or autonomy. Okay, so by making the tasks that they perform more meaningful, more meaningful. So that's job enrichment. So the difference between enlargement and enrichment, in enlargement we were manipulating the scope of jobs. So it's all about adding more tasks, or increasing the frequency of those tasks. But in job enrichment, we are manipulating the depth of the job. So we are increasing, but not the number of responsibilities. We are increasing the level of authority, the level of decision making that you have, how meaningful and how critical the job that you are performing now. So that's job enrichment, the second approach. Another approach is called the job characteristics model, the JCM. So this is a very popular, very common type of approach when it comes to job design. Lots of companies are, employing this kind of framework so that they can redesign their jobs in a systematic way. So this model, job characteristics model, introduces 5 core job dimensions for uh, increasing the level of complexity of the job, for increasing the level of motivation that those jobs bring. So this is the job characteristics model. It presents 5 dimensions. We will discuss those 5 dimensions next. So this exhibit shows us the 5 core job dimensions here on the left hand side, and how do they lead to psychological states, and how those in turn result in personal and work outcomes. So in the job characteristics model, we have 5 core job dimensions, and those are skill variety, task identity, task significance, autonomy, and feedback. So those core job dimensions, when we work on increasing these types of dimensions on the jobs that we are designing, what are we doing? We are working on improving some of those psychological states. So when we increase the level of skill variety, when we increase the level of task identity, what is that going to result in? This is going to result in more meaningfulness of the work. Now you, as an employee, you will feel that you are doing something that is meaningful, that is important. And what is that going to lead to? How is that going to result when it comes to work outcomes? This is going to give us high internal work motivation and high quality work performance. So this is how the job characteristics model work. So the 5 core job dimensions, when we ensure that your job as an employee, they have all of that available. So this is going to lead in you experiencing a more refined sort of psychological state. You feel that I am part of something important. You feel that, yes, I have more responsibility, I have more authority, for example. And this is going to give us more motivation. This is going to give us better performance, and this is going to give us much more satisfaction and lower turnover, lower people leaving, meaning more commitment, less absenteeism, and so on. So this is how this model works, and this is why this model is one of the most popular ones. So let's take some time to discuss those dimensions. So the first one is skill variety. So like, to what extent do the activities you do on a daily basis, to what extent are they various? To what extent are they different? To what extent do you need different types of skills and abilities in order to perform them? So that's skill variety. So imagine that the type of job that requires only one sort of skill in order to finish it and complete it. This is not going to be a fun job to do. This is not going to be a motivating kind of job to do. But the job that requires more skills is typically one that is going to be more motivating. أنت شخص تخرجت من الجامعة إن شاء الله من الكلية. You have lots of skills. عندك قدرات مختلفة. عندك قدرة العمل الجماعي. عندك قدرة تنظيم الوقت. عندك قدرة كتابة التقارير إلى آخره. أوكي، عندك كل المهارات هذه. تخيل أن أنت تشتغل في وظيفة تتطلب منك استخدام مهارة واحدة فقط. مهارة واحدة فقط، هذه المهارة الوحيدة اللي أنت تستخدمها في عملك. طيب ومهاراتك الأخرى فين راحت اللي أنت اكتسبتها بعد خبرة وبعد تمرين وبعد تدريب؟ So this is why skill variety is important. This is why when you use different skills on the job, this typically leads to more, feeling that you are, achieving something more, and therefore you are going to be more motivated. And then the second dimension is task identity. So this is the degree to which a job requires the completion of a whole and identifiable piece of work. Task identity. Let's take an example. أخصائيين التوظيف مثلا، الناس اللي يشتغلون في التوظيف، يفترض إنه أنت تشوف السايكل كاملة. يعني من يوم ما أعلنت عن الوظيفة الشاغرة إلى ما سويت المقابلات، إلى ما راجعت السير الذاتية، إلى ما وقعت عقد الموظف، شفت التاسك من البداية إلى النهاية، شفت السايكل كاملة من البداية إلى النهاية، من يوم ما كان إعلان وظيفة شاغرة إلى أن انضم الشخص الجديد للشركة بسببك أنت أخصائي التوظيف اللي جبت الموظف هذا. ولكن in some companies and in some organizations they make things more specialized. So we have people whose only task is just to do interviews, and others whose only task is to sort through the CVs and resumes. لما انت ما تشوف الموضوع بالكامل من البداية للنهاية، انت شغلتك فقط انه انت تسوي فرز للسير الذاتية. انت ما عرفت ايش صار قبل وما راح تعرف ايش صار بعد. So you don't see your task as a full kind of identifiable thing. ما يبان لك انت ايش الاثر اللي قاعد تسويه في الشركة، ايش الاسهام اللي انت تقدمه. So this is what we mean by task identity. So when you see your job from A to Z, you feel that I am doing something that is important, something that is making change, something of value to the organization, this is definitely going to be a more motivating kind of job. And the third one is task significance. So significance is about importance. Significance is about impact, is about influence. So the degree to which a job has a substantial impact on the lives or work of other people. إلى أي مدى تحس إنه المهمة هذه اللي تسويها أو الوظيفة هذه اللي أنت تقوم بها تؤثر بشكل أو بآخر على الآخرين. تؤثر بشكل على الآخرين. يعني الشخص اللي يشتغل مثلا في وظيفة معلم يحس كذا انه انا وظيفتي قاعد ابني اجيال وقاعد I'm shaping the minds of the people who are going to lead the future. الشخص اللي هو يشتغل مثلا في حفظ الامن، مثلا رجل امن او رجل اطفاء، يحس انه وظيفته فيها حفاظ على حياة الاخرين، يحس انه وظيفته فيها معنى حقيقي كذا، يساهم في تغيير الناس، في حفاظ امنهم الى اخره. So that is what we mean by task significance. To which extent you feel that my job is important, my job is making a difference in the lives of others. So the fourth job dimension is autonomy. So another word for autonomy can be freedom. To which extent do you have control and freedom over your own activities? So do you have independence when it comes to designing and planning your work activities or not? Or everything is planned for you to the bone, as they say. So when you have freedom, when you have autonomy, when you have control over some aspects of your job, this makes you feel more motivated. This makes you feel more satisfied. عكس الوظيفة اللي انت ما عندك فيها اي تحكم واي سلطة لاتخاذ القرار حتى على تخطيطك لأعمالك اليومية. كل شيء مصمم لك من قبل المشرف حقك أو السوبرفايزر أو المانجر. This is not a not necessarily a healthy type of environment. So autonomy, it gives you more control over your own activities and makes you feel that I can at least influence my own activities, and therefore this gives you more sense of fulfillment. And finally, feedback. Feedback is a very, very important part of any job. Managers must always give feedback, and employees should always seek feedback. So, to which extent, the job you are carrying out gives you some sort of information about your performance and effectiveness. So feedback is about, kind of an assessment or an evaluation by the person who is entitled to give you that, which is based typically your manager or your supervisor. So imagine that you are doing a lot of things and never getting any feedback, never getting, any sort of idea whether or not you did a good job. تخيل انه انت قاعد تسلم assignments وتسلم essays وتسوي اختبارات من غير ما نعطيك انت كم جبت في الاختبارات هذه. طيب انت كيف تعرف الان اذا انت ادائك كان جيد او لا، اذا انت كل الجهد اللي بذلته هذا كان مثمر او لا. So that's why feedback is important. It gives you an idea of whether or not you were actually moving in the right direction. It gives you an idea of of your performance. It assesses your achievement. It gives you a sense that what you were doing was actually fruitful, was actually beneficial, was something that we benefited from. So this is why feedback is a very important aspect of any job. And now with an interestingly titled slide, Redesigning Job Design Approaches. So the job design approaches that we just discussed are the more traditional ones, and these are some of them, more emerging modern ones that we will discuss now. So we have mentioned so many times that nowadays work is all about team activities and group assignments and projects and so on. So we need others to do our jobs. This is a fact that we need others to perform our own jobs. We need input from them. We need information. We need a lot of different aspects that depend on other people for us to perform our own activities. So it only makes sense that because of this high involvement when it comes to relationships with others, we design work around this aspect, the relationship part. And this is why it is called the relational perspective of work design. It comes from the term relationships. So this is why you will see a lot of organizations nowadays, they focus a lot on bringing their employees together in terms of activities, on and off work. حصل كثير من الشركات بدأوا يسوون شغلات زي اليوم المفتوح ويوم الأسرة وإلى آخره. الهدف منها هو توطيد علاقة الموظفين مع بعضهم، لأنه في النهاية هذول الأشخاص شغلهم يعتمد على بعضهم البعض. So it only makes sense that we want these employees, we want our employees to feel comfortable working with one another, to feel that they have that understanding, to feel that they have that group camaraderie and cohesiveness and so on. So we do a lot of things in terms of ensuring that we have that socialization part in our jobs, and that we make things easier in terms of communication and so on. The next one is the proactive perspective of work design. We have seen before reactive and proactive changes. So proactive change was instead of waiting for something to happen and merely responding to it, we take the initiative and initiate the change ourselves. So this is what we want from our employees. We don't want them to just do what they are told and period. We want them to tell us how they can improve their own jobs. We want them to tell us how can we improve our organization. So who understands the jobs better than the employees who are actually doing them? هذول الأشخاص اللي يقومون بمهام العمل هذه هم أكثر أشخاص ممكن يعطوك نصائح حول كيفية تحسين العمل وزيادة الإنتاجية إلى آخره. So it only makes sense that you try your best to to give them what it takes so that you facilitate bringing that about in them. So how can we, encourage them and motivate them to take the initiative and improve their own work activities? It's all about, giving them some sort of autonomy and freedom. So instead of just always just telling them what to do, giving them orders and commands, it's about, giving them some sort of control over their own activities, at least giving them, some voice in deciding how work should be done. And in addition to that, reducing the level of ambiguity. When you make things clear, people are going to respond well to that, and they will understand what it takes now to do the job, and therefore they are going to tell you how can things be improved. It's about reducing ambiguity, reducing the level of stress. When people are stressed out, they are not necessarily going to be motivated to improve what they're doing. So in addition to the socialization part. So the proactive perspective means that we can design work to be more motivating by allowing employees to take the initiative to change and improve their own work activities. And since we talked about proactivity, we need to talk about high involvement work practices. So how can we encourage our employees to become more involved in their work, to become more interested and more invested in what they do? We have mentioned, reducing ambiguity, reducing the levels of stress, giving them some freedom and autonomy. But remember, we have discussed also before a term called employee empowerment, and that is, giving employees the power to make some sort of decisions, especially decisions that affect their own work. When you involve people in making the decisions that affect them, they are going to accept them better, and they are going to, be more uh, more involved in implementing them, in executing those plans and activities that they have just decided on. So high involvement work practices, it's all about eliciting greater input. It's all about encouraging employees to tell you more. It's all about, instead of employees being passive workers, simply just, implementing decisions without thinking about them, without, trying to at least analyze them. We are here trying to make sure that they are more involved, more invested. They are actively trying to, improve their work activities as well as the organization as a whole. And since we started discussing the more modern approaches of work design, let us also talk a little about the more contemporary theories of motivation. So we have discussed a lot of theories at the beginning of the chapter. But here we will introduce two more theories that are more contemporary, that, nowadays research was not necessarily sufficient when it comes to these particular approaches and theories, but more and more people are becoming interested in these theories as they have a different angle of explaining motivation. So the equity theory's main idea is basically a comparison. When an employee compares his or her own input and outcomes ratios against those of others, and if there are any inequities, he or she will try to correct them. Let's take a step back and try to explain this. So let's first look at input outcome ratio. So as an employee, you bring something to the job. You bring your own experience, your efforts, all of those input factors that you bring into the job. And then because of those input factors, you get something in return. You get a salary, you get some benefits, you get recognition, you get promotions, and so on. So this is what we mean by the input outcome ratio. Okay, so the input is what you bring to the company, your experience, your efforts, your time, your skills, your knowledge, and so on. And then you also get something back, something in return. And those include the salaries, the benefits, the promotion, the learning opportunities, and so on. So what happens is the following, is that you will start comparing your ratio against those of others. So what are you bringing and what are you getting? And then you compare that to your colleagues. زملائك الآخرين في العمل هل يقدمون نفس المجهود اللي أنت تقدمه ويحصلون على نفس المردود، ولا يقدمون مجهود أقل ويحصلون على مردود أعلى، أو العكس. So this is the equity theory's main idea. It's all about comparing those ratios, and if you feel, if you perceive, if you think that there are any inequities, there are any discrepancies, any differences, and you feel that this is not fair, then you will try to correct that situation. How do we correct that situation? You will start either reducing your input, or basically demanding more outcomes. Okay? إذا أنت تشوف إنه أنا جالس أبذل مجهود كبير جدا وجالس أحصل على مردود معين، ولكن لما أقارن نفسي بزملائي أحصلهم ما يسوون نفس المجهود هذا ويحصلون على نفس المردود، هذا ما في نوع من العدالة. هذه هي الايكويتي ثيري. اوكي، فلما اشوف انه ما في عداله في الطريقه هذه، فانا راح احاول اعدل السيتويشن هذا. كيف؟ والله راح ابدا مثلا اقلل من المجهود. خلاص انت تبغى، ما عاد راح ابادر، ما عاد راح اجي دائما، كنت دائما اجي بدري، ما راح اجي بدري على الدوام، راح اجي على الموعد واطلع على الموعد. خلاص اعطيك المينيمم ريكوايرمنت فقط، اجي 7 واطلع 4. That's it. So this is one way of correcting those inequities, and this is the equity theory's main idea. It's all about comparisons of input and outcome ratios against those of others. So to understand the equity theory better, let's also talk a little about some of its major factors. So one of the most major concepts in the equity theory is what is called reference. So who are those reference? What are those reference? It's the people, the systems, anything that you compare yourself against. So if you are comparing your input-outcome ratio against your colleague Saleh, Saleh in this case is a reference. Okay. Another major concept in the equity theory is the distributive justice. And distributive justice is, do you feel, do you think, do you believe that the distribution of rewards among individuals was fair? The distribution and allocation of rewards and salaries and so on, was it fair in your point of view? So that is distributive justice. And the final one is procedural justice. It's kind of self-explanatory. So do you believe and feel and perceive that the procedures that how these rewards were allocated, do you feel that they were fair and just? Okay, so distributive justice is whether or not you believe and think that the distribution and allocation of these rewards was actually fair. Procedural is about the how, the process from procedure. It's how you perceive the procedure of being either fair or not. How was this determined? على أي أساس أنت قررت إنه صالح هذا هو اللي حياخذ الترقية؟ على أي أساس أنت قررت إنه صالح هذا هو اللي حيطلع الكورس مش أنا؟ على أي أساس قررت إنه صالح هذا هو اللي حياخذ زيادة في الراتب مش أنا؟ Okay, that's the procedural justice. Based on what did you determine that? Okay, so research has shown that when it comes to employee satisfaction, distributive justice has more impact. Distributive justice has more impact on employee satisfaction. But procedural justice is also important because it has been found to have a greater influence on your willingness to quit or leave the organization. When people believe that the criteria were fair when it comes to deciding promotions and salary increments and so on, they would stay. They would stay and they would have more trust in their bosses and their organizations. But when they feel and perceive and think that this is, these rewards are not being distributed fairly, that the criteria of determining how these things are, allocated, when this criteria were not fair, then people are not just going to, accept this, and they might decide to leave the company. Again, we're still talking about the equity theory, so here are some different situations of inequities. So the first kind of situation is when you feel that you are being under-rewarded. So when the input is greater than your outcome. لما أنت تعتقد أن أنت جالس تبذل مجهود كبير جدا لكن المردود أقل من المجهود اللي أنت تبذله، خصوصا لما تقارن نفسك مع الآخرين. So you feel now that you are being under-rewarded. So what are you going to do to correct that situation? You are going to reduce your input. Reduce your input. Another situation is when you feel that there is complete equity. Your input against your input outcome ratio when compared to others is the same, so you feel that this is now a fair situation. The third one is when you feel that you are being over rewarded. لما انت تشوف انه انت جالس تبذل مجهود معين ولكن المردود اللي جالس بيجيك مقارنة بالآخرين أكثر. انعكست الآية هنا لما تشوف إنه الناس الآخرين قاعدين يبذلوا مجهود كبير جدا وياخذوا راتب مثلا أقل منك في نفس الشركة وعندهم نفس المهام ونفس المسمى الوظيفي، لسبب أو لآخر أنت راتبك أعلى منهم. So you feel now that you are being over rewarded. So how are you going to correct that situation? You are going to increase your input. راح تبذل مجهود زيادة عشان تحاول تسوي البالانس. Okay, so this is what the equity theory is all about. Input outcome ratio, compare against others. Do you feel that this is fair or not? Another one of those contemporary theories, it's called the expectancy theory. It comes from expectation. So to which extent do you believe that, do you expect that, when you put forth a certain level of effort is going to result in that outcome? That's the kind of the first factor. The second factor, how favorable and how desirable, how attractive is that outcome to you? Okay, so how strong do you expect that if you do this, you will get that result? How strong is your belief, is your expectation that when you do something, you will get that result? And then that result, how attractive is it to you? How favorable, how strongly do you want it? How strongly do you feel that this is going to benefit you? So that is the expectancy theory. Okay, so if you want to put it an example, so when you know that there's a new project in your organization, so how strongly do you think, do you expect that if you tackle that project, if you take on this project, it will result in a promotion? How strong is that expectation? Okay, and then how much do you want that promotion, or how attractive is that promotion to you? Is this something that you actually want and you feel that this is something that is going to be good for you or not? So that is the expectancy theory. So this is an illustration of the three relationships in the expectancy theory or the expectancy model. So we have mentioned that the expectancy theory is all about whether or not you believe that when you do something is going to result in something, and then whether that something is desirable enough for you in generic terms. So this is an illustration of how that works. So there's a linkage, there's a connection between individual effort and individual performance. So to which extent is it believed that exerting certain levels of effort is going to result in certain levels of performance? And then to which extent is that level of performance going to lead or result in certain rewards. So that's the relationship between the outcome, the results, the rewards, and what you have brought, the performance that you have exerted. And then finally, to which extent is those rewards, to which extent are those rewards desirable or attractive or favorable to you? So this is all, this all boils down to individual goals. So if this is one of your goals, to get a promotion or to get a salary increment or to get a, some praise or recognition from your supervisor, this determines the level of attractiveness of those rewards. So those are the relationships that interplay in the expectancy theory or the expectancy model. And some effort that you are putting forth, that you are exerting, okay, it leads to certain levels of performance. That performance is going to is going to result in certain rewards, and you have to, evaluate for yourself to which extent do you see those rewards as attractive. And this is just a reiteration of what we just discussed. So 3 levels or 3 relationships in the expectancy model. The linkage or the connection or the relationship between effort and performance. To which extent do you believe that, putting forth certain efforts is going to lead to certain levels of performance? And then to which extent is that level of performance instrumental, important, essential to, leading to those rewards? And finally, what is called valence, and that is basically the attractiveness of those rewards. To which extent do you want them? To which extent are they favorable to you? And this is something that you have set as your goal. Many of the theories that we introduced in this chapter are complementary, meaning they work together, they support one another. So you can use more than one. So this is why they are called theories. It's not necessarily a system that you must take for granted, but this is something that you can use in order to come up with a more comprehensive system of motivating employees at an organization. So let's go through this model. The base for this model is the expectancy theory or the expectancy model. So at the left-hand side, we have individual effort. So this is where we'll start. And individual effort, there's an arrow leading into individual effort. So where is this arrow coming from? It's coming from individual goals. So we know from the goal setting theory, for example, that we introduced earlier in this chapter, that when you have clearly defined goals, you will be motivated to achieve them. So in that sense, goals direct behavior. So when you have clearly defined, realistic, smart goals, then you are going to show and exhibit certain types of behaviors and put forth certain levels of efforts in order to achieve those goals. So goals lead to effort. Goals lead to certain levels of effort. And then we know from the expectancy theory that there's this relationship between effort and performance. To which extent do you believe that that level of effort that you are going to exert is going to lead to certain levels of performance? And from here we know that, from our different theories that we introduced, do we have fair criteria for evaluating performance, for example? This comes from the equity theory. Okay, so it's all about justice and fairness when it comes to equity theory. So there's this effort and performance linkage or relationship. And then the relationship goes on from performance to rewards. So in that sense, again, we talk about the fact that how are these two related? We mentioned before from the expectancy model, to which extent do you feel that those rewards are favorable? How much do you want them? And to what degree do you believe that that performance that you are going to show is going to lead to those rewards. And then finally, we have the relationship between organizational rewards and individual goals. So how does the cycle end? We go back to the very first theory that we introduced, and that's the basic needs theory, Maslow's theory. So why do you want these goals? Because you want to satisfy certain needs for, we had physiological needs, we had, social needs and self-esteem needs, and so on. So this is how all these different theories interplay. This is how they come to work together. And this is how, in an organization, you understand, how people behave and why do they, behave the way they do. And when you know this, you can design a system and redesign jobs in a way that is more motivating, more fulfilling, and more satisfying. We always say in management that we do not have one best approach. This is why we follow this concept of contingency. So there is no one best answer, and what works in certain situations doesn't necessarily work in others. So in a global business environment, what is applicable in one area is not necessarily applicable in others. So the way you motivate employees in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is not necessarily going to work for the people who work in Vietnam. Different cultural factors come into play here. So we must keep that in mind. We must know that all of the theories, not all, but many of the theories that we study have been developed by certain people from certain backgrounds. So we need to know how can we adjust them in a way so that they work for our people in that special context that we have. So we have global companies in Saudi Arabia like SABIC, and SABIC has plants all over the world, in Australia, in Asia, in Africa, in North America. So the reward system, for example, in Saudi Arabia is different from the reward system in the same company, SABIC, in North America, for example. Why? Because of that, cross-cultural kind of challenge. So we need to understand that what works here doesn't necessarily work there, and you need to examine that cultural framework. Another special thing to pay attention to when we are talking about motivation, again, one of those special factors is that the fact that we have unique groups of workers nowadays. So we cannot have a one-for-all kind of system, because we have to design a system that that targets specific groups of people, because they have different needs, they have different goals, they have different skills, abilities, personalities, aptitudes, and so on. So what motivates me, what motivates my group from my background is not necessarily motivating for others. So this is something to pay attention to, and this is what organizations, this is why organizations are facing a challenge, because people are different, and nowadays we are hiring different groups of people from diverse backgrounds. So how can we come up with a system that is motivating for all of these people? So some of those special groups of people are diverse employees. So employees from different backgrounds, different races, different religions, different genders, and so on. Professionals, so those who are experienced, those who can get a job anywhere they want. How can we, what motivates this special group of people? And then we have contingent workers. Contingent meaning like temporary workers, those that we hire on a contract basis, for example. And also low-skilled minimum wage employees. So those, for example, like janitors, like laborers, and so on. So how can we motivate these people? How can we make them interested in coming to work every day and not leaving us? They might be low skilled, but they are important to our organization. So how can we motivate them and keep them loyal? So these are some of the challenges that managers are facing nowadays. And since we are talking about motivation and we are talking about the different needs and circumstances of different groups of people, we have to definitely mention flexibility. And when we talk about flexibility nowadays, we have many options to offer to our employees. One of them is the compressed work week. So from the name itself, it is compressed. مضغوط شوية. كيف يعني مضغوط? So instead of working 8 hours every day for 5 days and taking 2 days off, تاخذ الويكند إجازة، أخذ أكثر من الويكند إجازة، أبغى أخذ 3 أو 4 أيام إجازة، ولكن أبغى أنضغط شوية خلال اليوم. بدل ما أشتغل لك 8 ساعات راح أشتغل 10 ساعات. I know for a fact that if you go to get a job in McDonald's, for example, or in many of the fast food chain restaurants, they are going to give you two options. They will say you either work 8 hours every day and you get 1 day off, or you work 10 hours every day and you get 2 days off. So this is one of the options that you can offer to your employees. Employees have different needs because of their families or whatever. They might want to work another job and so on. A second option is flex time. So flex time is all about not determining or restricting employees to come at a certain time and leave at a certain time. For us as an organization, what matters is we want certain numbers of hours to be worked, and that's it. نبغاك تعطينا 40 ساعة عمل في الأسبوع. أنت على كيفك توزعها متى ما تبغى. تبغى تشتغل اليوم 15 ساعة، بكرة تشتغل ساعتين، بعد ما راح تجي. As long as we get 40 hours per week, then we're fine. Another interesting option is what is called job sharing. Job sharing. So this is a very interesting concept. So in job sharing, we, as the name implies, two people, for example, are sharing one job and they are splitting the salary. So for example, I cannot work 8 hours a day. I can only work 4 hours a day. Another person has the same situation. So we are sharing that same job and we are splitting the payment also. So we're splitting the hours worked, we are splitting the load of work, and we are also splitting the rewards and the payment. So this is something that you can offer to your employees. أحيانا ممكن هذا option يصلح مع بعض الأمهات اللي ما يقدرون يشتغلون عدد ساعات طويلة في اليوم، مع الناس اللي حابب إنه يشتغل دوام جزئي، اللي حابب إنه يزود من دخله ويشتغل في أكثر من شركة إلى آخره. And the final option, not the final, but one of the options also available is telecommuting. This is what is happening nowadays with the coronavirus and everything, where people are working from home. So telecommuting is as long as you have an internet connection, then you can just through your laptop and email, you can perform all your work activities. An important note here is that not all kinds of jobs can have this type of arrangement. It depends on the nature of the job, it depends on the competitiveness of the company and so on. ما هو شرط إنه هذه الترتيبات ممكن تشتغل في أو ممكن تطبيقها على كل أنواع الوظائف. في وظائف ما تحتمل، وظائف الأطباء مثلا، رجال الشرطة، إلى وظائف كثيرة جدا ما صعب إنه أنت تطبق فيها هذا الترتيب. So it depends on the nature of job, it depends on the nature of work within the company, the culture and everything. So, but still, there are lots of options, and the more options you offer to your employees, the more comfortable they would be, and the more loyal and satisfied and motivated they can be. So we mentioned that a special group of people that we need to find interesting and new ways to motivate them are our professionals. So professionals are those who have high levels of education, long years of experience, they are experts in their field, they can get a job anywhere they want. So what motivates these types of people? What motivates them is the job itself. Is perceiving their work as important and meaningful, something that changes lives, something that affects and influences the organization, affects and influences their societies, the economy, and so on, their fields of expertise. So these types of people, they need to be challenged. They need to be presented with tasks that they perceive up to their level. They can be motivated also by giving them tasks that require utilization of their problem-solving skills. These are the types of people who need support, who need to be mentored, who need to be supported and be provided with all the tools that they need in order for them to perform their jobs and to utilize their skills and experience. For them, it's all about perceiving and seeing their work as important, as meaningful, and impactful. And another special group of people that we talked about before was contingent workers. So contingent meaning temporary workers, those who are here on a contract basis, for example. They are only here to do a certain job for a certain period of time, 1 month, 2 months, 2 years, and then they're gone. So how can we motivate them? كيف تخلي شخص متحفز هو عارف إنه هو ما راح يجلس عندك إلا 6 شهور فقط? How can you motivate this kind of person? One of the things that you can offer them is the opportunity to become a permanent employee. زي اللي يشتغلون كونتراكت، تسمعون احيانا فيهم يشتغلون كونتراكت مع شركه سابق، كونتراكت مع شركه ارامكو، يبغوا يحفزونه، يقولوا له انت اثبت وجودك وراح تترسم عندنا. You become a permanent employee. So that's one of the things that you can offer them. If they are good enough, if you think that they can add value, then why not? You can offer them a permanent position. Another thing is, you can offer them an opportunity for training. They are almost always left out when it comes to training courses and any learning intervention. So when you show them that even though you are a temporary employee, but still I want you to learn something, I want to develop you, then they would be more motivated, more involved, and more proactive. And finally, they need to perceive equity. We have talked a lot about the equity theory. Just because I'm a temporary employee, it doesn't mean that you should take advantage of me. مو بس عشاني أنا موظف مؤقت معناته ترمي علي الشغل والموظفين الرسميين مرتاحين. There needs to be a just and fair kind of procedures and ways of evaluating performance and distributing and allocating rewards and benefits. Okay? The more they see that these procedures and these criteria are fair, then definitely the more motivated and the more satisfied they would be. And finally, the last group that we mentioned before was low-skilled minimum wage employees. So this is a large group in all kinds of organizations. So how do we keep those people motivated? Well, one of the ideas is what is called employee recognition programs. When you recognize their achievements, when you recognize their contributions, when you recognize and show them that I appreciate what you are bringing to this company. I appreciate your efforts and we value your presence with us in this organization. So it can be as simple as an employee of the month program. You have probably seen that in lots of fast food restaurants, for example. أحسن موظف للشهر هذا. أحيانا في what is called the newsletter of the company. They announce these things. فلان الفلاني حصل على جائزة أفضل موظف. فلان الفلاني إحنا نقدرك we understand that you are a good person and you are offering a lot to our company. And then of course offering sincere praise. when you, again, show them that they are being appreciated, and being valued, they are definitely going to feel more satisfied and more motivated. And the last thing that we will discuss in our chapter is some of the approaches of designing rewards programs. So how can we give our employees, based on what can we give our employees, their salaries, their compensation, their benefits, and so on. Of course, this is a more complicated kind of topic that you will study in more detail in future courses like human resources management, for example. But right now we are interested in just introducing some of the biggest concepts in reward design. So one of the common approaches is what is called open book management. Open book management. So this is literally what it means. It's about opening the books for all the employees so that they understand what's going on. When we say the books, we mean the financial statements. You will study those in financial management, in accounting, and so on. So in those financial statements, you will see, how much the company is making in terms of, revenue, in terms of profits, and whether or not they are suffering from any losses. So when you as an employee see that there is this kind of clarity and there's nothing that the company is hiding, when the company gladly discloses this kind of information to all its employees, when there's this transparency, then you will perceive things as more more fair, more honest, and that there is some kind of clarity in what's going on. So you will see your impact. You will see your impact on the profits of the company. You will see your impact on the losses of the company. You will see how much exactly your work is affecting and influencing the organization. That's the whole idea behind open book management. The second thing is what is called employee recognition programs, one that we just discussed with low-skilled minimum wage workers. It takes many forms. It's all about giving praise, expressing interest, showing approval, showing appreciation to people who do a good job. One of them is a simple, very straightforward one is the Employee of the Month program. The last thing on our docket is pay for performance programs, a very popular approach. So instead of being paid for the time that you spend in the company, you are being paid for what you do. You are being paid for the performance that you are exerting. You are being paid for your contribution to the organization. A very straightforward example is for assembly line workers, those who work in plants and factories. تخيل معي واحد يشتغل في مصنع ينتجون أجهزة جوال، بدل ما أعطيه أنا مبلغ مقطوع كذا في الشهر أنت راتبك 5000 ريال، لا أنا أقول لك على كل وحدة تنتجها تنجي تطلع من تحت يدك أنت حتاخذ مثلا 50 ريال. فبالتالي احنا نشجعهم انه يخلص وحدات اكثر خلال اليوم، وبالتالي يصير انتاجيته اعلى. So we are paying you for what you are contributing to the organization. Pay for performance based on what you are actually doing, what you are actually creating and producing. We are going to pay you, not for just the time that you are working here. So that was our chapter that talked about motivation, a very interesting topic. Lots of theories, lots of ways that companies can follow in order to motivate their employees. The one thing that you need to keep in mind is that how can we make those theories work, and how can we include all types of workers from different backgrounds, different skills, different abilities into these kinds of programs. Thank you very much, and I'll see you on the next chapter.